Father, we thank you that you are our refuge, our strength, and a mighty fortress in the time of trouble. Give us your wisdom in our deliberation. Grant us your knowledge in legislation, and grant us your compassion in the administration of our duties. Bless our Prime Minister, our Deputy Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, MPs, Senators, the Executive, the Judiciary, the legislative arms. Bless our economy, our Bahamian people. And Father, I affirm today that God is with us. I affirm today that you are for us, and we shall not fall, nor shall we fail. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
And we repeat the Lord's Prayer.
Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses,
as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation,
but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever. Amen.
Yes. Thank you very much, Senator Darius. We'll have adoption of the minutes.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the adoption of the minutes of the last sitting of this honorable chamber, which was held on the 7th day of March 2019. If I may obtain a second.
second.
It has been moved and seconded that the minutes be adopted as written. As many as are in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes have been adopted. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign, swearing in of new senators, communications by the President, messages from the Governor General, messages from the House of Assembly.
Message from the House of Assembly.
Bahamas number 28. Message to the Honorable the President and honorable members of the Senate from the Speaker and representatives of the Honorable House of Assembly. The House of Assembly acquaints the Honorable the Senate that they have passed the following bill and desire the consent of that Honorable Chamber, namely, a bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act to require the payment of outstanding fines in respect of traffic offenses before the grant of a driving license, to require the immediate production of a certificate of insurance, driving license upon the request of a police officer, and to prohibit the use of electronic communication devices while driving. House of Assembly, Nassau, 27th March 2019. Housen Mutri, Speaker. Bahamas number 29. Message to the Honorable the President and honorable members of the Senate from the Speaker and representatives of the Honorable House of Assembly. The House of Assembly acquaints the Honorable the Senate that they have passed the following bills and desire the consent of that Honorable Chamber, namely, a bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act, a bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Act 2019. House of Assembly, Nassau, 3rd April 2019. Housen Mutri, Speaker.
Laying of documents by ministers.
Yes, Madam.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Dion Folks.
Yes, Madam President. I beg your leave to lay the following orders on the table of the Senate. The Currency Notes and Coins Amendment Order 2019, the International Obligations, Economic and Ancillary Measures, Democratic People's...
You just do what you want. Everything ticked out.
You're going to lay this? I see, okay.
So
just the ones that are...
right. And
okay.
then you
Okay. The Industries Encouragement Approved Product Well Done Drilling Services Limited Order 2019. The Industries Encouragement Approved Manufacturer Well Done Drilling Services Limited Order 2019. Okay, that was first to review. Okay. And Madam President, I wish to also beg your leave to lay on the table of the Senate the following regulations. Road Traffic Box Junction Regulations 2019. Road Traffic Fixed Penalty Amendment Regulations 2019. Credit Reporting Regulations 2019. Immigration Fees Amendment Regulations 2019. Immigration General Amendment Regulations 2019. And finally, Madam President, the following agreements. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas Heads of Agreement. This is the agreement with Carnival. Let me read the full title.
No, Disney Cruise Lines.
This is with Disney?
Disney Cruise Lines, yeah.
Yeah, the heads of agreement with Disney Cruise Lines dated the 7th of March 2019.
Order that the documents do lie on the table. Order that the documents be brought up. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you, Madam President. I beg leave to move to lay on the table of this Honorable Senate the International Obligations, Economic and Ancillary Measures, Democratic People's Republic of Korea Order 2019. If I may say, Madam President, that this is the final step of the Bahamas incorporating and domesticating into its law the United Nations Security Council's resolutions. We had previously tabled the same under the International Obligations Act, the UNSCR resolutions against terrorist organizations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now this deals with, of course, the nuclear proliferation activities alleged against the DPRK, North Korea. And so this brings us into full compliance.
Order that the document do lie on the table.
Thank you.
Order that the document be brought up.
Madam President, I beg leave to lay on the table of this Honorable Senate the Anti-Terrorism Regulations 2019. Again, this is a critical bit of subsidiary legislation. It brings fully into effect the Anti-Terrorism Act that we passed, which the world acknowledges to be a very comprehensive and far-reaching enactment by this Parliament, places the Bahamas on the leading edge in the fight against global terrorism.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Order that the document be brought up.
I beg leave to lay on the table of the Honorable Senate the Road Traffic Amendments Regulation 2019. Madam President, these are the regulations that will permit left turns on red. Now, Bahamas must be well aware of some critical issues. First of all, it's not every red light that you can turn left on. There will have to be a sign placed.
This may not be the right time to do that explanation.
No, saying it has to be explained because these are just tabled. These are just tabled, and I think it's important for Bahamas to know, particularly as it involves road safety, that it isn't every left turn that you can turn left on. It has to be a sign put up saying that left turns are permitted on red. You must come to a complete stop, and where that sign is there, then you can turn left on red. Thank you.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Order the document be brought up.
Madam President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate the Financial and Corporate Service Providers, Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Rules 2019.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Order that the document be brought up.
Madam President, I beg leave to lay on the table of this Honorable Senate the Security Industries Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Rules 2019.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Order that the document be brought up.
Madam President, if I may say, those two regulations are also critical to the Bahamas' positioning itself as a world leader in the fight against money laundering and terrorism. We are. We are, and we're being acknowledged.
Further laying of
We're
documents by
being acknowledged
ministers.
as having made outstanding progress.
Further, we are not at a debate point in our agenda. We are at further laying of documents by
Exactly.
ministers.
I beg leave to lay on the table of this honourable Senate the Securities Industries Corporate Governance Rules 2019.
Order that the document be brought up.
Thank you.
Order that the document do now lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
No further documents to lay.
Communications by ministers.
None.
Communications by senators. I believe Senator the Honorable Jamal Moss
No, we bring them later.
would like to
See that, we can see that.
bring forth a communication regarding a recent cybersecurity conference that he attended, and I will allow him to bring his short report at this time.
Madam President, colleagues, fellow senators, my fellow Bahamians,
Yeah, you're right.
good morning.
It's not a.
I rise on this
It's nothing
occasion.
of
I
a
rise on this
contentious nature.
occasion
Just laying a
to
report.
give a brief summary report
Yeah.
of my trip to the
Okay.
United Kingdom a month ago. I had the esteemed pleasure of being chosen to represent the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in Oxford, UK, at two cybersecurity conferences. This trip, courtesy of the Organization of the American States, OAS, took place between the 24th of February 2019 through the 1st of March 2019 and involved 3 intense days of conference workshops. The meetings were attended by representatives from other Commonwealth countries. Thank you.
We have some.
Thank you. The first of the 2 conferences were the Global Cyber Security Capacity Building, and the other was the New Directions Annual Conference for the Global Cyber Security Capacity Center, also known as the GCSCC. This one-day conference was held at the Oxford Martin School, University of Oxford, in United Kingdom on Tuesday, the 26th of February, 2019. This conference focused on reflecting on the progress of global cybersecurity capacity building over the past 5 years and mapping out plans for the next 5 years and beyond. Cybersecurity capacity building refers to a set of initiatives that empower individuals, communities, and governments to reap potential gains from investments in digital technologies, or what the World Bank calls digital dividends. The GCSCC, the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center, was established approximately 5 years ago and is an international research center for cybersecurity capacity building, whose aim is to develop a comprehensive framework for the understanding of what works and doesn't work across all areas of the cybersecurity capacity. The purpose of the GCSCC's work is to enable governments and enterprises to adopt policies and make investments that have the potential to significantly enhance safety and security in cyberspace, while also respecting core human rights values and interests such as privacy and freedom of expression. One of the most notable works of the GCSCC to date has been the development of a cybersecurity capacity maturity model, the CMM, which was designed to measure a country's cybersecurity capacity maturity across 5 areas known as dimensions, which aim to enable nations to self-assess, benchmark, better plan investments and national cybersecurity strategies, and set priorities for capacity development. The second conference, the Cybersecurity and Strengthening Democratic Process, was held at St. Hugh's College, Oxford, United Kingdom, over a 2-day period, February 27 to the 28th of 2019. This 2-day conference was a collaboration between the OAS, UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center. The purpose of the conference was to heighten awareness of the importance of cybersecurity and the importance of promoting and developing a consolidated national strategy on cybersecurity to ensure a safe and stable cyberspace at both regional and international levels. The role that parliamentarians play in addressing and combating cybersecurity threats was also discussed. The conference also focused on the various digital threats to democratic processes, namely threats to election technology, and the challenges faced when addressing these cybersecurity threats from countries throughout the region. The pros and cons of electronic voting systems were heavily discussed using case studies from countries like Estonia, Switzerland, and the United States to highlight the complexities and considerations which must be taken into account before implementing any form of electronic voting election system in order to maintain the integrity of the voting process and maintaining some of the key principles of the democratic process, such as ballot secrecy. At the end of the conference, the OAS gave an overview of one of their latest projects, cybersecurity and strengthening the democratic process in the Americas. The purpose of this project is to raise awareness and improve cybersecurity capacity in the electoral process in OAS member states. The OAS will collect data from member states via a survey, which was scheduled to be released sometime in March or April 2019 to all member states and follow up in-depth, semi-open interviews with especially relevant actors commencing sometime in May or June 2019. At the end of this project, it is expected that cybersecurity guidelines with good practices for democratic process will be published to assist OAS members states in the safe transition to the enhancement of their already existing electronic democratic processes. Overall, the meeting was very informative and timely. I am extremely appreciative for the opportunity afforded to me by the OAS to attend such an enlightening forum on behalf of the Bahamas. The session provided beneficial information, which I am certain will assist us in creating effective policies to successfully combat cybercrime and spread awareness of the importance of cybersecurity throughout the Bahamas. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Moss, for that communication. Questions? Answers to questions? Presentations of petitions? Appointment of select committees? Reports of committees? First reading of bills.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of the Road Traffic Amendment Number 2 Bill of 2018, if I may obtain a seconder.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act to require the payment of outstanding fines in respect of traffic offenses before the grant of driving license, to require the immediate production of a certificate of insurance, driving license upon the request of a police officer, and to prohibit the use of electronic communication devices while driving, be read a first time. As many as are in favor would say aye. As many as are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed would say nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
The bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act requires the payment of outstanding fees with respect to traffic offences before the granting of a driving license, to require the immediate production of a certificate of insurance, driving license upon the request of the police officer, and prohibit the use of electronic communication devices while driving.
Further first readings.
To move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act be read a first time. As many as are in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Information Act.
Further first readings? Further first readings?
These, not the traffic bill, these automatic exchange, they're very technical.
Yeah, they just changing the time for reporting. Okay,
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019 be read a first time.
Correct statements in the financial reporting authority.
We should correct it now?
Corrected by, not a big
Okay.
corrected by law form.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just a misstatement. David? As many.
Oh, I'm sorry. As many as in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment.
Further first readings?
There are no further first readings, Madam. No, they're not. Investment fund has been read already. We're in second reading of the investment funds bill.
You better take a break.
I better take your.
Better take a break. Recess. for
No,
5
I
minutes.
think can we suspend the Senate for 5 minutes? I'd like to check the minute on this because.
Is there a second?
Thank you.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate suspend for 5 minutes. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the Senate will suspend for 5 minutes. The AG was trying to take the clerk's job there.
I think that
The chair
collective memory of the
recognizes
House,
Senator
Madam-
the Honorable Carl
Thank you,
Bethel.
thank you. I think that the collective memory of the House defeated the memory of Cabinet Office who prepared the action sheet, not the clerk. And in fact, the minutes of our last meeting clearly reflect that the bill was read a first time on the 7th of March, 2019. But it's not to defeat the clerk. It was we knew that he'd been given incorrect instructions from elsewhere. Not at all. I said the Cabinet Office has made an error.
I suppose
so we
there
have
need.
second reading now.
Well,
Yes.
I will say where we are in the order of business, which
Well.
is second reading and committal of bills.
I
Are you
was
now?
asking.
Are you now?
There was a question
Are you
mark.
now standing? Are you ready?
If you allow me to.
Yes, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you so very much. Madam President, I just wish to inform the House that we have received the unanimous consent from members opposite. In addition to the passage of the investment funds bill, taking it through the remaining stages, second reading, committal, third reading, and passage, that the opposition has very kindly, and I am very grateful to them, I thank them, has agreed that the two financial bills, the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information and the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendments Bill, will also be taken through the final stages to passage today with the unanimous consent. Thank you, and I thank the leader opposite. And so I would first move for the second reading and committal of the two financial bills, and then I will engage in the debate on the investment funds bill. Thank you. Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading and committal of a bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Bill 2019.
Is there a second?
No. We are. No. I will refer to these in the context of the debate on the major bill, which is the investment bill. Okay, I'll be guided. Okay, cool. Anyway, okay. No. I'm going to now move as instructed. Listen, man, even a broke clock is right once a day, so some of them are right today. No. I'm wrong today. And take instructions and we'll follow them. Madam President, I beg leave to move. When it comes from the President? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know who's the broke clock he's talking about.
I'm the broke clock.
Okay.
But I'm not right. Oh, it's only a saying, Madam President.
Let's go. Fred, Senator. Okay,
Madam President, I beg.
Senators, we are at second reading and committal of bills, and the Senator, the Honorable Carl Methel, has the floor.
Thank you. Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading and committal of a bill for an act to update the laws relating to the regulation of investment fund business, to bring the law into harmony with international standards and best practices, to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds, to protect investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas, to repeal and replace the Investment Funds Act, Chapter 369A, and for connected matters. Madam President, I think I'm going to need to hold the box if someone would be so kind as to pass it down this way. Mr. Clark? Thank you, sir. Before I formally get into my remarks, I would just wish to make a few remarks about that event which has led to some of us wearing these beautiful pins beneath the flags, and that is this week commenced the celebration of Autism Awareness, and Tuesday was the inauguration of that process 2 days ago. Took place at Boston Square. And the Autism Civil Society grouping in the Bahamas is called REACH, and they sponsored and prepared the program. I'm happy to say that this year it was a splendid occasion. We weren't rained out. They weren't rained out. And in fact, virtually the entire cabinet of the Bahamas attended in a show of support for those children who are differently enabled than others, but who in their own special and unique ways are truly treasures for us in our society. And I speak many of those children who have various degrees of autism spectrum-related conditions. I must say that, we saw the full range. We saw beautiful children who could dance, sing, do all of the things that others who are also, thankfully mainstreamed in many instances into the what they call the ordinary education classes. They're not kept segregated anymore according to the norms or sent to different schools, but they're right in the primary schools, Garventines, in regular classrooms with other children, and it really was a wonderful, wonderful event. And the extent to which we as Bahamians move away from stigmatizing and stereotyping vulnerable children who may have a different, perhaps, a reality than we do, but who, despite their conditions, strive to be accepted, to be integrated into society, to be giving meaningful roles, and to have a meaningful lives and interactions. So I'm just calling on all Bahamians to embrace the efforts of REACH and other organizations that are assisting those children and persons in our society who have differences from us, from others, and to make sure that all persons get their day in the sunshine every day of their lives and have meaning and worth in their living. Thank you, Madam President. And Madam President, I move for the second reading and committal of this bill. And before I do so, getting into the full debate, I really must commend the Securities Commission of the Bahamas, which is headed by Ms. Christina Rowell and the wonderful members of her team, which includes persons such as Michelle Martinborough, the Deputy Executive Director and Senior Legal Counsel, Ms. Leslie Pearson, Senior Manager, Ms. Nicolette Shepard-Farrington, the Assistant Manager, and Ms. Krishna Higgins, Legal Officer. And I commend them for their very good work, excellent work, in basically producing this mammoth bill, which extends the size of the investment funds present bill by at least 100%, has expanded the direct role of the Securities Commission and their powers, specifically in relations to the investment funds in ways that I'll explain. These are powers that the Commission enjoys generally over the securities industry, but now they've been brought to bear with particular focus to the regulation of investment funds. The bill has been thoroughly modernized, and it has been brought up to date. It puts the Bahamas, again, as I say, at the leading edge of responsible and effective regulation. And so I once again thank Ms. Rowell and her team, whom I've named, the leading team, and of course everybody at the Commission for the very fine work that they do in ensuring that we do have an orderly and well-regulated securities industry. This particular bill is focused on what might be referred to as collective investment vehicles, generally, and specifically what we call investment funds. This bill, once enacted, will place the Bahamas at the leading edge of effective regulation and necessary compliance measures. Compliance, not only in terms of the rules and regulations that will apply domestically, but compliance in terms of the posture of the Bahamas in terms of our relations with the international community. And because, it is an inescapable fact that international business emanating in or from the Bahamas must interact with the international community. And therefore, the ways in which we regulate and, in a sense, guide our licensees and registrants is critical to the perception of the Bahamas and whether or not the Bahamas will continue to be maligned, castigated, named and shamed in ways that really do not reflect the hard work and the excellent contribution made by our regulators in ensuring that the Bahamas is in fact a clean and well-regulated financial services jurisdiction. So, Ms. Rowell and your team, let me thank you for your hard work in crafting this bill, and on behalf of a grateful nation, once again I express thanks. Madam President, before touching upon the important features of the present bill, it is necessary to place this bill in context with the current global initiatives, particularly those led by the European Union. These initiatives, of course, continue to raise challenges for our financial services sector, challenges that are not insurmountable, challenges that will be met, challenges that will be overcome. Members of this House, the Senate, would be aware that just last month, the European Union Code of Conduct Group, along with the European Ministers of Finance, recommended that the Bahamas not be put on a blacklist. Well, that's the first in a long time. It's a long time coming. Because it seems every time you turn around, someone is trying to name and shame and besmirch the name of our beloved country. And we have to spend so many days, so many weeks, so many months, if you will, in the trenches fighting against those who would malign and degrade the Bahamas. The Code of Conduct Group and the European finance ministers agreed that the Bahamas had complied substantially with all of the economic substance requirements set forth in the OECD and the European Union's BEPS project. To remind Bahamians, this is a project called the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Project. It is designed to prevent offshore structures, companies and entities, or standalone entities from shifting taxable income or profits from those high taxing jurisdictions to low or no tax jurisdictions, and thereby being structures that in the eyes of the larger, wealthier countries of the OECD and the European Union, in their view, permit the avoidance of an otherwise payable tax burden in their home jurisdictions. The way the initiative works, this is the BEPS initiative, is to require that all entities, companies, partnerships, etc., in low or no tax jurisdictions must have substantial economic presence, activities, direction, management, and control by human beings in the jurisdiction in which they claim tax residence. Most especially if a jurisdiction like the Bahamas is a country that has low or no corporate taxes or corporate income taxes. Low or no corporate taxes, low or no corporate income taxes. And so essentially they assess countries or legal jurisdictions and say, if you have low or no taxes, but you have an offshore sector, any company, and even if you don't, any company incorporated in your country must have economic substance, persons, command, control, and perform functions within your jurisdiction in order for that company to be tax resident in your jurisdiction. So, while the European Union and the Code of Conduct Group recommended that the Bahamas not be blacklisted, and the European finance ministers accepted that recommendation, and the Bahamas is not on any list, they did reserve further discussions with the Bahamas on the treatment of collective investment vehicles. Now, the term collective investment vehicles includes particularly investment funds, which are exactly that. People pool their dollars together as a group, give it to a fund manager with a fund administrator, and expect that the fund manager is going to appropriately invest that pooled money in some stock exchange or some other investment, according to whatever arrangements that they make. And that when they do so, these persons will be properly regulated in the jurisdiction of choice for these investments. So, for example, I think the central bank recently reported that the Bahamas has some over $270 billion in funds under management, largely in various sorts of investment funds. I think a lot of it is in investment funds. And so it's critical, but we have a small compared to at least one other jurisdiction where they got more than $1 trillion under management. So we're not really the biggest in this field, but we are significant in size. So it's very important that we have a world-class regulatory system. Now, the Europeans want to reserve a discussion with us, and I'm sure with those really big ones in our region as well, on this question of what happens with collective investment vehicles. Now, let me be clear that in the scoping notes issued by the Code of Conduct Group since early last year, and at no point up until this note from the Europeans were collective investment vehicles what they call in scope of the BEPS initiative. They're not in scope, but there is concern about them, and so the Europeans have reserved the right for continual engagement with us on this issue. So again, this is yet another signal that there are challenges on the horizon which will continue to confront us, even as we improve our regulatory framework. Let me say that this bill will, in my view, as I will show, hopefully, go some ways, if not quite a long way, towards answering what we think are some of their concerns. But we'll see. I suppose it's too much to expect that you can ever do enough. But certainly, recently at the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force plenary, when that grouping was reviewing the mutual evaluation report of one of our sister jurisdictions in the Caribbean, which happens to be a very big player in the area of collective investment vehicles, we observed that jurisdiction being raked over the coals over this whole question of these exempted companies and exempted funds, meaning companies or funds or collective investment vehicles that were given exemptions from what were otherwise the transparent rules set out in their legislation. And the whole inability of that jurisdiction to clearly say what the nature of these exemptions were and what was going on in terms of what was being done by these exempted companies and exempted funds. And so this whole issue of exemption, a former prime minister famously used to always say, what coming tall and short could see. We know who that prime minister was, Hubert Ingram. And so that was a real sign, that was a real signal to me, certainly sitting there watching it, that this question of broad-based powers to grant exemptions from what are otherwise transparent rules that seem to set a high standard for licensing and registration, and yet have embedded with them wide-ranging power to grant obscure, non-transparent exemptions, and exemptions on the basis where the basis for granting the exemption is not specified in any law. So again, the basis for the grant of the exemption is not transparent. That was going to be a problem. And so this bill, Madam President, thankfully, in my respectful view, addresses most, if not all, of such concerns, and particularly some that are directly related to the concerns of the European Union. And it severely limits, if it doesn't entirely eliminate, it severely eliminates many of the exemptions which presently, under the existing law, could be granted by the Securities Commission for reasons which the law as presently crafted does not require to be transparent, and which, in fact, may not even be publicly disclosed under the existing law. So this bill is a major step in correcting such obvious defects. Madam President, the reality is that in today's world, there is no tolerance for non-transparent decision-making or for the maintenance of opaque or secret structures or arrangements which could be seen as permitting or facilitating money laundering, terrorism financing, tax evasion, and yes, unfortunately, even tax avoidance. The inherent right, and no doubt under every European constitution, as well as ours, of the citizen to take legal steps to mitigate their tax exposure, even that is being challenged internationally now. It's now a dirty word, even, to commit tax avoidance in your jurisdiction. But that is the world we live in. Madam President, this bill will largely place us in compliance with European regulatory issues. This is important because it's an area not touched by the pre-existing act, but here there are specific parts of the act that are designed to create the possibility for opening the European market to Bahamian registered investment funds. The bill is fully compliant with all the relevant directives issued by the European Parliament in respect of what are called alternative investment funds. And the Europeans have what they call the AIFMDs, the Alternative Investment Fund Management Directives. And these directives set out the requirements to, in a sense, enter the European market and to offer financial services in terms of investment fund participation, whether directly in the EU or to trade European securities outside of the EU. And it's done so by obtaining what is called an EU passport and passporting. And this bill will enable Bahamian licensed funds to access that system. And so it will add to our competitive position in global markets. What happens is that once the Securities Commission licenses an alternative investment fund manager, the Commission must disclose that fact and all relevant information to the European Securities Market Authority, called the ESMA. And this is in Section 32 of the bill. And this will enable Bahamas-based AIFMs, that's Alternative Investment Fund Managers, to enjoy all the rights and privileges that are offered to EU-based investment fund managers to offer their services in the European Union via their passport mechanism. And in fact, the whole of Part from Section 72 on to at least 105, section 105 or so, is all dealing with alternative investment fund managements in the bill. And really, it's an opening for our industry to expand the services that are offered. Madam President, the bill before this House, the Senate, also moves significantly towards requiring economic substance in several important respects, thus moving closer towards the BEPS initiative requirements for substantial presence, command, control, direction, and management human beings in the jurisdiction. And it enhances the requirements that are necessary to show that an applicant for an investor's license, an investment fund administrator's license, is deserving of such a license. So the standards have been raised, expanded considerations and powers are given to the Securities Commission to improve the quality of its vetting of applicants for licenses, which will enhance the quality of our regulation of investment funds. Under the provisions of Section 36 of the bill, economic substance is mandated by subsection G of Section 36, which requires that a company or entity, partnership, which applies for a license must have, I quote, a minimum of 2 senior officers residing in the Bahamas, who shall include the chief executive officer and the compliance officer. So both the chief executive officer of a fund administrator must, and the compliance officer must demonstrate to the Commission that they reside in the Bahamas. This residing in the Bahamas and the performance of 2 critical functions. One is to be the chief executive officer, the other is to be the compliance officer, and to ensure that all anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism protocols are followed to ensure that no part of any investment fund's assets is comprised of monies derived from proceeds of crime or associated with the financing of terrorism or nuclear proliferation, etc., or money laundering. So both of these persons must be resident in the Bahamas. And that's an important move towards ensuring greater substance in the country. And of course, the Commission, before licensing them, must be sure that they are fit and proper and satisfy all of the qualification requirements, which we'll come to. And so, Madam President, we see that senior level command and direction, as well as anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing measures in the person of the compliance officer, must physically reside in the Bahamas. Person must reside here. These must be real human beings providing senior and vitally important services to ensure both substantial presence as well as effective anti-money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism oversight, and to ensure that it is conducted in the Bahamas. Additionally, by subsection F of Section 36, the fund administrator must have a principal office in the Bahamas. That's not to say it can't have an office elsewhere, but a principal office must be in the Bahamas. So again, this goes to substance. You have to rent office space. You have to have employees. Once again, showing a real connection and presence in the Bahamas. So, Madam President, these provisions go a long way, perhaps even, a very long way towards answering both FATF and BEPS concerns. FATF being an OECD initiative, the BEPS being an EU/OECD initiative. Madam President, the bill further expands and enhances the requirements necessary for the grant of, for example, a fund administrator's license. Formally, all that was necessary to show the Commission was that the proposed administrator was fit and proper, that they would administer the funds in a proper manner, and that they had sufficient expertise to administer investment funds. I say I missed out a quotation mark part here. Okay. Under this bill, however, applicants must also show that he or it, being a company, has a sound reputation. And if it's a legal entity, that it has directors, officers, and senior managers who meet the fit and proper requirements. And further, it must show that it complies with financial requirements, meaning, among other things, that it has adequate matching funds to cover losses or adequate insurance coverage to achieve the same end where such insurance is a requirement. And particularly in Europe, the provision of insurance to cover losses for the AIFMs is a requirement. But the intent of these provisions is to protect investors from loss. Look at this issue now. It's expanded that the Securities Commission can determine you don't have a good reputation. The reputation is an intangible, but it is an essential quality in business. It's an essential ingredient. It gives the Commission the power to say, yeah, you may fit the bill. But then, we see you have a discharge, an expunged criminal conviction for theft. It's no longer on your record, but our researchers have revealed it. We don't think you could have a good reputation. I guess the standard would be that while you may fit all of the technical qualifications, if there's something that the Commission finds out about the applicant that the Commission wouldn't be comfortable announcing about that applicant, that's something that goes to sound reputation. And the Commission, I know them well. I came to know most of the leadership of the Commission, the Securities Commission, particularly in our work, where they would come every week. They still do, every week, the highest leadership, to attend our anti-money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism, FATF task force meetings. So I've got to know them well, and I would say that if they felt that there was something about an applicant that they wouldn't be happy to talk about publicly, they're not going to license that applicant, period. But this gives the commission this greater power to get a sense of something ain't right here, and we better not license this person. So that, it might limit any JR applications, judicial review. I've got this degree, I've got that degree, and you still wouldn't give me my fund license, and therefore they sue them for judicial review or whatever. This gives a little more of a touchy-feely ability for the Commission to just form a judgment that this person, this entity may not be the right entity, the right fit for the Bahamas. The bill also provides, within the context of this bill, enhanced investor protection. This bill makes a significant improvement by imposing the requirement now that every investment fund must appoint a custodian or custodians. And the duty of the custodian under Section 70 of the bill is essentially to protect the interests of investors by ensuring that there is proper accounting of their equity interests. So, if a person gives $100,000 to an investment fund for investment, they no longer have a legal interest in that money, but they have an equity interest in whatever assets the investment fund invests in. And so the custodian is there to make sure that the count is right in respect of each investor. The duty of the custodian is also to ensure that the instructions of the fund manager are carried out. The fund manager is the person that actually says, makes the choices, if you will, what to invest in. And to be carried out and to ensure also that any proceeds of the sale of assets are paid over to the fund without delay. And further, that any income that accrues to the investment fund is only applied in accordance with the Act. In other words, in accordance with the law. So the custodian also bears fiduciary responsibilities pursuant to Section 71 of the bill and must hold any assets that he holds or she holds in trust for the investment fund. The custodian must be independent of the fund administrator, clear and separate. And so he or she essentially is now a statutory watchdog over the integrity of the operations of the investment fund. Madam President, the bill also goes a step further and has brought over from the Securities Industries Act, which act empowers the Securities Commission to regulate all operators in the securities industries, inclusive of investment fund administrators and managers, etc. But gives some of the powers that are in the Securities Industries Act and has brought them over into the Investment Funds Act, directly imposing those powers and giving those powers to the Securities Commission for the purposes of the better regulation of investment funds. So it's a direct signal to the industry, the investment fund industry in particular, being a segment of the overall securities markets, that the Commission will have direct powers under Section 132 to impose administrative penalties. This power to impose administrative penalties is also an FATF, anti-money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism requirement. And so it's good to see that these provisions in the Securities Industries Fund have been clarified by their placement now in the Investment Funds Act. So it is very clear to the investment funds industry exactly what all of the powers of the Securities Commission are. And this particular power is a power, an administrative fine, which under Section 132 allows the Security Commission to impose an order on any person who has breached a provision of this act to pay the Commission an administrative penalty of not more than $500,000 as may be prescribed by the Commission for each contravention. That's for the serious breaches, up to $500,000 as may be prescribed by the Commission. Now, the failure to file necessary documents, which is one sign of trouble sometimes, when you see people don't timely file required documents that they know they have to file. The Commission will have the power to fine persons in default up to $1,000 a day until the documents are filed. Let me say that in transposing the administrative penalty regime that is in the Securities Industries Act into the Investment Funds Bill and ultimately into this enactment, they have taken the opportunity to raise the fine from $300,000 now to $500,000 in terms of the management of investment funds. Further, Madam President, the power that the Securities Commission now has under the Securities Industry Act to share information with international regulators, regulator to regulator, has also now in Section 138 been brought into this Act as well. This clarification of the law, meaning It's been taken from the act that governs securities industries generally, but placed into this specific and very important aspect of the securities industry, being the investment fund industry, is to clarify the law and make it clear and send a clear signal to the industry that higher regulatory standards are being implemented and higher standards of conduct will be demanded. And so this is also to strengthen the ability of the Securities Commission to perform what is now an expected course of conduct by any regulator, that they will have meaningful dialogue with sister or brother regulatory agencies in other countries on an as-needed basis. So if they need to find out some information, if they have a question, they can contact regulators in other jurisdictions and get help. If other jurisdictions have any question, they can contact the Securities Commission in the Bahamas and get whatever information they have that is relevant to the inquiry. Let me say that this concept of regulator, assisting regulator, is not unknown to the Bahamas. In the day when the gaming board was acknowledged to be a world leader in the regulation of onshore casinos, as I believe it still is. Certainly when new licensees, Madam President, applied to the casino commissions in Atlantic City, they would ask the gaming board of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to give verification of the good faith or good standing of these applicants. This happened in our well, certainly the leader opposite in my lifetime and my colleague, our lifetime, when the Gaming Board of the Bahamas was considered the gold standard of regulator, and their views on licensees, applicants in Atlantic City, the views of the Gaming Board of the Bahamas was sought. This is the same process, not so formal, but the same process. It's understood. The world is demanding something that the Bahamas has been doing long time, long time. If you want to have the benefit of good Bahamian regulation and you need our guidance, ask us. And so, Madam President, I must say, I'm going to say this now, it's happening more and more and more. Bahamian delegations to international conferences dealing with issues to do with regulation, issues to do with anti-money laundering, issues to do with fighting the financing of terrorism, more and more. The hosts of these conferences are saying to the assembled delegates, if you want to know what to do, follow the Bahamas. It is happening more and more at international conferences. So never mind that we're still in some troubled waters. The Bahamas is moving very quickly in the right direction, and our efforts are being noticed by persons who otherwise would be our detractors. And it's only a matter of time before we get off these adverse lists. The bill in Section 145 also brings over from the Securities Industry Bill the offense of market misconduct, and specifically applies that to the investment fund market. And it really it makes it clear that a person, meaning a person or a corporate entity, must not mislead the Commission. In other words, can't lie to the Commission, can't make false or misleading statements, cannot induce others, either intentionally or recklessly, to cause them to invest in a fund by any false or deceptive statements, and they cannot dishonestly conceal information. These and other market conduct offenses under Section 145 will attract a penalty on summary conviction of $150,000 or 1 year in jail or both, and on conviction on information or on indictment, as they say elsewhere, to a fine of $500,000, $500,000, or 10 years imprisonment or both. These changes now embed some of the regulatory functions of the exercised today by the Securities Commission under the provisions of the Securities Industry Act 2011 within the new investment funds bill. And as I say, this is a clear signal of heightened regulatory due diligence, heightened excellence in supervision, and these changes will assist in, as I have always said and I continue to say, putting the Bahamas at the leading edge of best practices throughout this world. Now we come to the question of exemptions, which was where I started this. And by section 146, the power of the Securities Commission to give exemptions from the transparent and open requirements and provisions of the Act are limited, severely, but not entirely, and have been curtailed by section 146 of the bill. And by that section, the Securities Commission may grant exemptions and modifications to a person. That means a human being who may be licensed, or a company or entity, etc., from all or specific provisions of the Act. So they kept the power to grant exemptions, note, from all or specific. However, there is a very important limitation on that power. And section 146 of the Act, any such exemption must now be granted on a transparent basis, because the exemption can only be granted, quote, pursuant to regulations to be made by the minister pursuant to section 159 of the bill. In other words, the minister will have to prescribe by what they call subsidiary legislation. He will make the regulations that will set out what exemptions can be granted, what is the basis for the grant of the exemption, publish it and sign it as a regulation, table it in the other place, table it in here. It then will be gazetted, and as subsidiary legislation will have the force of law. So, for example, the regulation that allows, that I spoke of earlier about turning left on the light, that will in due course, in the course of this week or early next week, having been tabled in both houses, now be submitted to Cabinet Office. From Cabinet Office, it will be gazetted, and eventually an amended regulation will be, that it amends, will be prepared by the Law Revision Committee, but that's another issue. But that regulation, which will allow left turn, will become a law of the Bahamas once the regulation is gazetted. So once the minister, in this instance, under section 159, sets out a list of what exemptions can be granted and a transparent set of principles upon which it could be granted by the Commission acting reasonably, and that document is signed and tabled in the other place and tabled in this place, it will then be gazetted and will become and have the force of law. This limitation of the power to grant wide exemptions to the transparent regulations of the minister is a critical advancement in the right direction. You know, let me be explicit on this question of exemptions, right? The senior officers of the Commission, including Ms. Christina Rowe, will be quick to tell you that I came down, as we were looking at this draft, very hard against exemptions, based on what I'd observed happening to one of our sister jurisdictions. Very hard. I had a bad attitude towards exemptions. I said, get rid of them all, get rid of them all. However, they, being far more experienced in matters to do with investment funds than I would be in 3 lifetimes, and in their wisdom, managed to enlighten my darkness on this issue by pointing out that there are a number of investment funds that really are in the nature of being more of an investment club, but with very rich people. So very rich billionaires and their buddies get together and decide that they want to pool their resources, and they'll decide among themselves what they're going to invest in, but they set up a fund for business purposes and reasons and efficiencies in a place like the Bahamas. Well, they're not going to the general public to seek to induce anybody to invest. They sit around at a golf club and decide, listen, man, you throw in $500 million, I'll throw in $500 million, you throw in 250 million, and so they pool their own money. Well, there's no point at which that grouping is going to be required to, or even want to, issue a prospectus to entice the general public to come in and invest. So they should be exempted. They have a plausible case to be exempted from those requirements. They may want to be their own investment fund manager. So, the exemptions for all of these qualifications with licensing. Listen, if you and your buddies want to go, and as they say in the poem myth, risk it all on a turn of pitch and toss and lose, well, start again from your beginnings. That's their right. So in other words, you have a regulator such as the Securities Commission could well be placed could see an application coming from an investment club, a group of golf buddies, etc. And so obviously the rules would require it in a transparent way to be relaxed, because they're not going to the general public, they're not going to the unsuspecting person. This is some people investing their own money and deciding that they want to, say, gamble on the stock market or take a risky investment in a uranium mine in Africa. It's a question of each individual application. And so what the power of exemptions did was allow the regulator to factor in the quixotic nature of some applications and the peculiarities of the individual fund applicants. So, I had a universally negative view of the whole concept of exemptions because I saw the way in which non-transparent exemptions hurt one of our fellow jurisdictions. The Securities Commission has pointed out that there can be perfectly transparent exemptions given on perfectly transparent bases, and that therefore it's necessary to keep the power. So the compromise arrived at is it will be kept provided it is conditioned by the regulations to be made by the minister. And so this is, we think, will be a wonderful way to preserve the flexibility of exemptions, but also ensure that they are transparent, clear, and understandable. In conclusion, Madam President, this bill is a significant advance in the right direction. It amalgamates several of the powers granted to the Commission, the Securities Commission, in the Securities Industry Act, and applies the broad regulatory and administrative powers of the Securities Commission towards the regulation of securities generally, but also specifically, in this case, to the regulation of investment funds. In short order, Madam President, the Securities Commission will produce a new securities industry bill for consideration, which bill, once accepted and once enacted, hopefully, will improve the ability of the Commission to better regulate the securities industry, the broader industry as a whole, and once again achieve 21st century standards of improved and enhanced regulation. But importantly, regulation that is facilitative and not constrictive. Regulation that is pragmatic, that facilitates legitimate business without constricting the proper and orderly development of the investment funds market in the Bahamas. On those notes, Madam President, I commend the bill to colleagues, and I formally now move for the second reading and committal of the Investment Funds Bill 2019, if I may obtain a seconder.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Dr. Mildred Hall Watson.
I don't pass it across the chairman, sir.
Oh, I wouldn't dream that I love you too much. I do indeed. That's a young woman for you. Young voice and being Thank you. Sorry.
Good. Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Bahamas. Let me first say thank you to Senator Darius, who, although initially seconded the presentation of the bill, has allowed me to speak. Because in my other life, unfortunately, I have a pending emergency and may have to leave. I am pleased to stand this morning to second the Investment Funds Bill 2019, which is another most progressive piece of legislation, which is one of the many that the Honorable Prime Minister and his cabinet have presented to date, particularly in the financial area. I want to give God thanks for allowing me this opportunity to be a part of this legislative process at such a time as this, and to the Honorable Prime Minister for facilitating this appointment. Good, I'm glad. Before I begin the bulk of my presentation, which will not be very long because I know many of you, based on our WhatsApp messages, want to be out of here at 1 o'clock to have lunch.
I'm saying yes. Fully committed.
I want to simply state that
Very good.
I want to add my prayers to that of many of my fellow Bahamians and the heartfelt concern that we have for all of the children who have been abducted in the last several weeks, and trust that the Bahamas Police Force, through the vigorous work that they always do, will be able to put a handle on this, but we give God thanks that they were all returned safely. I would also like to acknowledge a young man who is an 11th grader at St. Augustine's College. His name is Trent Johnson. He's an 11th grade student, and as the winner of the annual United Nations Day essay competition, will have the opportunity to accompany the Honorable Prime Minister to the United Nations session in September of this year. This demonstrates not only the ability of many of our young people, but in particular, it demonstrates our Prime Minister's commitment to involving our youth in national activities. Also, I would like to congratulate several of my parliamentary colleagues, because often we hear about them when they're on the front page of the newspaper. But I would like to congratulate the Most Honorable Prime Minister for his vision in the kind of bills and legislation that has been brought forth today. I'd like to congratulate the Minister for Grand Bahama, the Honorable Casey Thompson, who's a powerhouse in a small package, facilitating many wonders in Grand Bahama.
You had to put up with this from your own.
Our Minister for Youth, Sports and Culture, the Honorable Lanisha Roll, who has made Junkanoo one of our major cultural events, a Bahama Islands activity, not only New Providence-centric activity. Our Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Dionisio de Aguilar, who, through his work and collaboration with his team in getting the hotel in Grand Bahama to a LOI stage, where when the government initially agreed to purchase the hotel, there was much negativity, but somehow the coppers now are quiet. So, opposition, I'm waiting on your opposition. I'd like to acknowledge the genius of our Labor Minister, the Honorable Dion Folks, in holding the community jobs fairs that have been more than productive by taking government initiative to the people. Madam President, let us be clear that our entire team, including the honorable members, the parliamentary members of this honorable chamber, continue to do the work that is necessary to bring and keep our nation into the 21st century as we uplift our people. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate the REACH organization that caters to members of our community, particularly children who have autism and autism-related conditions. This month is being celebrated as Autism Awareness Month. On Tuesday evening, they celebrated the opening of their month of activities, and it was truly heartwarming to see students, parents, board members under the chairmanship of Mr. Gibson, and supporters at this gathering. The program touched the hearts of all present, where there were many parliamentary members who had first-hand exposure to this particular situation in our community. It obviously touched the hearts of our Prime Minister and the Minister of Education, who made commitments to this organization that will improve it by miles. The Prime Minister, of course, confirmed his commitment when in the House yesterday he was able to put actual facts on the table relative to what the government will be doing for the REACH organization. What was so positive about watching this was when we hear the phrase, it takes a village means everybody on every side. To see a member of the opposition stand and enthusiastically agree with the Prime Minister's commitment to the REACH organization. And so I must say that I was happy that the Honorable Glenys Hannah Martin was able to stand and support this initiative. And finally, I would like the board of the REACH organization, and especially the parents, know that we support and admire their strength and their love of their children, challenging though it might be on many occasions. Finally, our Special Olympians. I don't know how familiar we are with them, but I have worked with them for many years. And it was so heartwarming again to see them stand as they received our congratulations, particularly the medal winners.
And it's important to know the fact that they work and they try so hard that they are truly all winners. So, Madam President, as I begin my presentation this morning on supporting the bill, I would like to say that it is important that as a part of our Bahamas Security Commission efforts, we have been able to come up with a document that will consolidate our financial rules, regulations, and guidelines. Now, the bill tells us, the documents along with the bill tells us the investment fund bills is a result of an initiative on the part of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas to overhaul the regulatory regime for investment funds in the Bahamas, specifically by repealing and replacing the current Investment Funds Act to harmonize the law with international standards and practice. The aim of the reform is to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission, as our leader, government leader here has told us. And as we regulate not only our funds, but we regulate persons and provide for measures to protect investors, the public, and particularly the reputation of the Bahamas. So this will repeal and replace the Investment Funds Act 369A and address other connected matters. The economy of the Bahamas, Madam President, is improving day by day. And we as a country will be getting much more foreign direct investments. And many other people will, as they gain more confidence in the Bahamas' economy, invest in the Bahamas. Not all of these people necessarily who may make this decision would be of upstanding character. And we need to make sure only clean money is invested in the Bahamas. We need to ensure that policies are in place so no money that comes from or can be used for illegal activities like money laundering, financing of terrorist units, and other areas are used for any type investment in the name of the Bahamas. This bill will do that. Madam President, we are all aware of the European Union blacklisting of the Bahamas recently and the hoops that we as a country has had to jump through. What I would like to state, though, is that our country stood up, performed, and were able to have us removed from that list. The European Union, as we know, will continue to move the goalposts to their liking, but we will continue to work to keep our standards and our international control levels at where we will not be put back on a blacklist again. While this bill may not be as a direct result of the blacklisting, there are components of it that will be of a positive nature to all international financial bodies. Madam President, the Free National Movement is making things happen. As we are every day working in this economy to improve it, we will continue to do so by legislation such as this. But always the government will put the people first. We made hard decisions, but those hard decisions were necessary. We are just now beginning to see the fruits of our labor. As the economy gets better, we see a forecast of increase in the number of jobs. We see the growth. We see the double-digit growth in tourism. We have seen the most arrivals at Lynden Pindling International Airport in 2018 than in the last 28 years. this is a government turning the country around, a government that is making it happen. The bill itself, Madam President, is an involved, detailed, and complex bill. As we can see from our schedule, it has 9 parts. It has 167 clauses, but it is necessary in order for this bill to be of the nature that it is, so that we do not get international bodies on a fluke making decisions to question our integrity. The world we live in today is not the one we grew up in. And we have many who may not live by the same morals and beliefs that we in the Bahamas primarily do. So with the need to protect our economy, our financial industry, I understand, as our government does, the need to place strict laws in place to protect our name. Because I think all of us are aware of the fact that you may have a whole lot of things, and those things you may lose. But your name, which signifies your integrity as an individual, is one of the last things you want to consider that it will be lost. And it is in the interest of the Bahamas for us to always be able to say the integrity of the Bahamas and its governing team, and I can speak only for the current governing team, that it cannot be questioned. Because we know there have been times during the lifetimes of many of us when that has not been the case. And it has taken many years for us to recapture where we currently stand. Madam President, we have much to be thankful for. We are rich in love and people and talent. We also have reestablished, as I said, our good name. And to ensure that the right people are our investors, we must make sure that this bill becomes a part of our legal process. Therefore, Madam President, I am privileged and highly pleased to have the opportunity to stand and second this bill, which I think over time will make a major difference in the economic and financial life of our country. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jo Beth Colby Davis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as always, I'm grateful to God for granting me this opportunity to stand in this place and contribute to the building of this great country, the Bahamas. I wish to take this opportunity first to wish my beautiful niece, Zion Taylor, a happy belated birthday, which she celebrated on April 2nd. Wanted to know that Auntie loves her, and I'm very proud of her. Yes, of course. I also want to pay recognition to the same day, April 2nd, which is recognized as World Autism Day and used to encourage countries across the world to take the necessary measures to raise awareness about people with autism and doing whatever we can in our powers to assist. Madam President, today I do not wish to be before you long as I stand to bring contributions to the Investment Fund Bill 2019. I wish to congratulate and recognize the hard work and heavy lifting by the Securities Exchange Commission, the director, and the entire team at the SEC for carrying out this task. In addition, well done to the various Bahamian professionals who know the industry and are experienced and capable enough to guide us. I'm also aware that this bill is supported by the relevant industry stakeholders such as the BFSB and the financial service industry. The bill, Madam President, is a push to broaden the scope of investment funds in the Bahamas. It augurs well for the financial industry by opening up the market on an international level. The bill is an overhaul of the regulatory regime for investment funds in the Bahamas. By repealing and replacing the current Investment Fund Act, the intention is to harmonize the law with international standards and best practices. The bill further seeks to expand the powers of the Securities Commission with an aim to protect investors, the public, and most importantly, the reputation of the Bahamas. Through repealing and replacing the Investment Funds Act, Chapter 369A, the legislation seeks to modernize our investment fund product offering and prepare the Bahamas to be more competitive on a larger scale with neighboring countries such as the Cayman Islands. In addition, Madam President, it allows for the compliance of EU requirements, enabling Bahamian investment funds to be offered in EU member countries by EU investment fund managers. Madam President, I wish to state clearly that the opposition has no issue with the bill and we support it. The bill is non-contentious and once passed would be helpful to the financial service industry. However, I stand to make a few comments surrounding the financial service industry and the Bahamas negotiation power. We have been in and out of this place debating and passing legislation over the last 23 months to the benefit of the EU, to avoid a crash in our financial industry, to avoid blacklisting and other sorts. And for whatever reason, it seems like this is a never-ending task as the goalpost seems to move at the drop of a dime. Madam President, we, the Bahamas, must become proactive in our negotiations with the EU and other first world countries. Being proactive means we must not only seek to perform at our best, but we must enlist the expertise of professionals who can work for us and with us to ensure that our legislation is not only being modernized on paper to suit the EU needs, but that it satisfies the needs of the industry here in the Bahamas, coupled with the modernization of policies and initiatives that can affect positive change in the economy. The business community, more specifically the financial sector, must feel the positive result of the change in legislation, otherwise our work is in vain. Madam President, in our efforts, we must ensure that we are building strong networks and alliances with big players like the United States. And I'm not referring to us sitting in the corner of a room in President Trump's house like school children waiting for lunch break. I'm talking about an honest discussion that results in real and positive relationships and assistance in modernization of legislation and the building of strong economy. Madam President, don't get me wrong, I support the bill. It is a good start, especially for those that work in the financial service industry. But we must go a bit further. It is apparent that the financial service industry is in trouble, and there is a brain drain occurring in the economy, which further results in the erosion of the middle class. So putting the Senate stamp of approval to the passing of this legislation is just the start. The government must go a step further in determining how to reconcile the burden that is being placed on the young professionals who seem to be waiting for tangible solutions. At present, the reality is for the eroding middle class is we have no disposable income, being backed up with debt and credit. We're mortgaged out. We have nothing, so we can invest in nothing. So, Madam President, while the government is bringing about legislation to modernize the financial industry, there are some questions that remain to be answered. Is the government finding ways and means to encourage and assist financial service providers and professionals to become entrepreneurs so that they are able to widen the spectrum and provide further jobs? is the government providing real solution for funding of startup capitals, not the mere $5,000 grants that can't pay first, last rent or security. How far are we as leaders and policymakers taking this legislation so that it is not just a piece of paper used to mostly benefit foreigners, and once they are established, they throw crumbs to our Bahamian hopefuls? For the professionals, these sort of modernization of legislation are great on the face of it. However, there needs to be a push further. What more can be done to encourage entrepreneurship amongst the financial service industry professionals, those who wish to be their own bosses, those who want to be consultants in the industry or service providers? Madam President, we can come in and out of this place and the other place and pass legislation. But in most instances, and to many in society, it is just a bunch of paper being passed around. There needs to be an overhaul in the economy, a transformation that will be felt by all Bahamians. This government needs to do more than just appease the needs and desires of the EU. What is the strategy for saving the financial service industry? The Bahamian people want to hear about policies and initiatives that will bring tangible changes to their present circumstances and their livelihood. Having said that, Madam Vice President, I do not wish to take away from the hard work and the heavy lifting that it took to bring the reform we see here today through this Investment Fund Bill 2019. Again, I applaud it and I congratulate all in the Securities Exchange Commission, the director, and industry professionals that assisted in drafting. Whilst I applaud and congratulate, I wish to see more done in policy and other forms of legislation that push us a bit further where it can be felt tangible changes across to young professionals. I thank you all. God bless this beautiful country, the Bahamas. Happy Easter, AG.
As many.
I rise today to make contribution to the investment funds. And as usual, I am extremely grateful to the Almighty God for the opportunity to be a part of the legislative process. And I'm humbled to sit in this chamber and legislate on behalf of my generation and the generations to come. I'm also appreciative of the Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis and his confidence that he has in the ability and the capacity of young people to lead. Madam President, just before I get into my contribution, I would like to highlight and state some facts for the record. And I must state so that our listeners are aware of the accomplishments and the hard work of this F&M administration.
All right, now speak.
I would like to say in education, beginning this September, that qualifying students from all over the Bahamas will be able to attend the University of the Bahamas free of charge. $2.6 million has been given and set aside for scholarships at BTVI for those that qualify. There's the Bahamas Be Your Own Boss Scholarship that provides students mainly between the ages of 18 to 25 old with the requisite technical and vocational skills to start their own businesses and to become entrepreneurs.
Wow.
In early education, there has been an increase of access to pre-primary education for 3- and 4-year-olds 400 vouchers have already been paid to the Ministry of Education, approved private preschool providers through the Private Preschool Partnership Program. 3 new preschool classrooms were opened in New Providence, and 4 new state-of-the-art preschools were added for our young children. There's also been the launch of our school pilot program, where 11 schools on New Providence, Grand Bahama, Long Island, Andros, Cat Island, and Abaco all participated. They've got laptops, LCD projectors, and fire tablets given to teachers and students. Infrastructural upgrades for increased demand for Wi-Fi and internet connectivity, and the Ministry of Education has acquired 12,000 digital devices for distributions in our schools across the Bahamas.
All of it done in less than 2 years.
We've seen a reduction in crime, 25% decrease in the murder rate in 2018, 18% decrease in armed robberies in 2018, and 23% decrease in unlawful sexual offenses, which I believe it's safe to say that this F&M administration is working real hard to keep the Bahamian population safe. There's also been the establishment of the National Neighborhood Watch Program, of which Urban Renewal, especially in Grand Bahama, is actively a part of. There's also been the installation of land-based radar in Inagua for better protection of our borders and to reduce illegal migration.
Listen to the facts, y'all.
So it is safe to say today that this F&M administration, our government's priorities are on economic growth and job creation, combating prevention of crime, social development through education, so that we can build a stronger economy with opportunity for all Bahamians. Madam Vice President? Yeah, come into that. Madam Vice President, just before I get to the bill. Madam President, just before I get to the bill, on March 11th to the 15th, Senator Renard Henfield and myself participated as the Bahamian Parliamentary team at the PAL America's Open Parliament Network, team Beyond the Walls of Parliament, strengthening Parliament oversight in South America. Strengthening Parliament oversight is important for parliamentary relationships, public trust, action plans, and initiatives developed with civil society. The session emphasized the significance of exhibiting a democracy that provides responses, results, and resources for the population through the promotion of principles of transparency, accountability, access to information, and citizens' participation. It was a stark reminder that we must ensure that our parliament is not just operational but effective, ethical, and the watchdog for our people and our democracy. Yeah. One of the other areas of interest was most parliaments have a commission of integrity and corruption, noting that there's no such thing as petty corruption because any corruption disrupts and destroys systems, people, nations, and generations. Furthermore, heightening the need for national regulations and for policy disaster reduction or disaster management act, of which the Bahamas has a disaster preparedness and response act. Lastly, there were presentations on post-legislative scrutiny in providing a comprehensive review after a set number of years has passed to determine if all requirements were met of the law and if it should be continued, as certain pieces of legislation may only be needed for a certain time. The post-legislative scrutiny strengthens democracy, reduces corruption, and increases the legitimacy of the government with its citizenry. I wish to also note that the underlying thread of the PAL America's sessions were on accountability, transparency, and integrity, all of which the Free National Movement government highlights and operates in this period.
Yes.
I wish to also congratulate Senator the Honorable Renard Henfield, who went in election unopposed and became the Vice President of PAL Americas for the Caribbean region. Madam President, I turn my attention to the Investment Funds Bill 2019. The purpose of this Investment Funds Bill is to modernize the regulatory framework for the investment funds in the Bahamas to achieve international standards and best practices of the investment funds industry. Application being made for an investment fund license, professional fund, or smart fund should be made to the licensor in the prescribed form accompanied by the current offering or latest draft document, all of the documents required and relevant approved structure, certified copy of the constitutive documents, and the prescribed fee. The Commission may license an investment fund subject to such conditions as deemed appropriate. The Commission may at any time waive, vary, or revoke any condition attached to the investment fund under subsection 5 in writing. The Commission may refuse to license if investment fund does not satisfy the provisions of the Act, and if the name is similar to that of another investment fund already licensed. If the company is likely to suggest falsely the patronage of connection with some person or authority in the Bahamas or elsewhere, if any suggestion of special status with the government of the Bahamas, an investment fund shall not surrender its license without notification of 21 days prior to the Commission, which also has to be approved. Should the investment fund want to suspend activity, they are to inform the Commission in writing 14 days prior to the suspension. Then under subsection 1, the Commission shall suspend the license of the investment fund and publish in the Gazette. Under subsection 3, operation may resume within a year of suspension. The AIFM, Alternative Investment Fund Managers, is required to produce an annual report for each financial year and submit to the Commission or the competent authority no later than 6 months following the relevant financial year and in the authorized jurisdiction of operation, comprising of balance sheet or statement of assets and liabilities, income expenditure, report on activities for the financial year, written communication on changes that are material and needed to be disclosed to investors, and written confirmation on the total amount of remuneration for the financial year. The accounting information should be audited by one or more persons, and the auditor's report should be included in the financial report. Of course, it is mandated for the AIFM to make available the description of the investment strategies, objectives, information on whether the fund is authorized or established, a description on the types of assets, techniques of investment, investment restrictions, sources and usage of leverage, description of all fees, charges, and expenses. Madam President, the Commission has the power to obtain information and investigate to determine if there is a contravention of the provisions of this Act, to provide assistance to regulatory authorities of other jurisdictions as well. If the Commission finds a person in breach of the provision of this Act, an administrative penalty of not more than $500,000 for any contravention must be paid. Should the Commission deem necessary, they can give assistance to regulatory authorities of other jurisdictions, freeze funds deposited, properties, or possessions. The aim of this bill, Madam President, is to overhaul the regulatory regime for the investment funds in the Bahamas, specifically to repeal and replace the current Investment Funds Act to harmonize our laws with international standards and best practices. We further aim to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds, to also provide measures to protect investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas. We also commend today the Securities Commission Exchange for the hard work done. I'm in support of the Investment Funds Bill 2019. May God bless this administration's effort to secure the prosperity and the advancement of the Bahamian economy and our people. Thank you.
As many, Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Clay Sweeting.
Thank you, Madam President. I am delighted to rise today on behalf of the Bahamas to contribute to the Investment Funds Bill 2019. Madam President, this bill is not contentious, and myself, along with members in the other place and this place, do support it. With that being said, I do not intend to be long. But before I get into the meat of my contribution, I would like to join other senators in recognition of World Autism Day. Having a child that is challenged myself, he is a trailblazer in determination in overcoming his own obstacles. So I'd like to stand with all who are taking measures to raise awareness for autism and not call it a disorder, but just an obstacle that they need to overcome. I would also like to thank Her Excellency, Dame Marguerite Finling, the Governor General of the Bahamas, for including Eleuthera in her tour of the islands. Her Excellency visited communities such as Harbor Island, Vogue, and Spanish Wells. And the children, adults, as well as the elderly all enjoyed celebrating her visit, as well as the opportunity to mingle with one-on-one with a lady of such elegance. I am sure she left Eleuthera with a whole lot of gifts and a whole lot of good island food. She received a true island welcome. So I just wanted to publicly thank her on behalf of the communities and the people of the island of Eleuthera. Madam President, from my understanding, this legislation seeks to modernize our investment fund product offering. This in turn should help us to compete more effectively within the financial service industry. Madam President, we have spent a lot of time in this place debating bills and legislation conforming to the EU and OECD standards. It always seems of massive importance that we must pass these bills right away to avoid being blacklisted. Only just a few months ago, the Prime Minister ran off to Europe to meet with the EU, but yet we were blacklisted again. This calls for concern not just because of the numerous blacklistings under this government, but that the fact that every time we pass legislation to conform, the bar is raised and the cycle starts once again. We must create alliances with our friends in big countries and counterparts in small countries. Be bold and motivated. The government just must be bold and motivated. In December, when we debated the compendium of bills affecting the financial services sector,
on a point of order, please.
The point of order.
Yes.
Recognizing Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you. The Honorable Senator has made an untrue, erroneous statement. The Prime Minister, when he went to Europe, was not addressing the attempted blacklisting by the European Union commissioners, which was such a botched attempt that as soon as it was submitted to the Ministers of Finance, it was rejected by the European Ministers of Finance. That issue arose the week after I and the Prime Minister had returned to the Bahamas from the Prime Minister's mission. The Prime Minister's mission was to address the issue of the Bahamas' compliance with the European BEPS initiative, about which I spoke, which had a threatened blacklist, which would not have been the European Union's commissioner's blacklist, but would have been a blacklist that was by the OECD and the European Ministers of Finance. That is what the Prime Minister went to address. As a result of the Prime Minister's intervention, there was a further dialogue with the European Code of Conduct Group, which allowed for us and one or two other jurisdictions, but particularly us, to make slight changes in our laws, which resulted in the passage of the amending bill that we passed in February, before the 24th of February, which meant that on the 24th of February, the recommendation went that the Bahamas not be blacklisted. So contrary to what the Senator said, the intervention of the most honorable Prime Minister was timely, necessary, and extremely effective in warding off and preventing the blacklisting of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas by the OECD and the European Union finance ministers.
your story.
Now, that is a fact. And 1 second, please, if I may, to clarify this.
Are you yielding?
First of all, I will end on this note. I will end on this note. I call on the member to withdraw his untrue statement and aspersion.
Madam President, on February 16, 2019, there was an article by the Nassau Guardian where it says Bethel, Bahamas to push back on EU blacklisting. It says on Wednesday, the Bahamas was blacklisted by the Commission due to strategic deficiencies in its anti-money laundering, AML, and counter-terrorist financing legislation.
Madam President, that is correct, and that was in February. It was in January that the Prime Minister and I were in Europe. And in fact, the purpose of our meeting in Europe in January was to deal with the BEPS initiative, nothing to do with anti-money laundering or counter-financing of terrorism. Please get your facts right, and when your facts are wrong, be honorable enough to withdraw false aspersions. I call on you now to withdraw your false aspersion.
Senator.
Madam President.
Senator.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator,
I call on you.
would you look at what you said previously and make a determination? If it is not, in fact, a fact, I would ask you to look at your statement.
Only a few months ago, the Prime Minister ran off to Europe to meet with the EU. After which, we were blacklisted. That's what I said. That is a fact. I didn't say what he met with him. I said he ran off to the EU, after which we were blacklisted. That's a fact.
No.
Madam President, I just want to continue.
No.
But that's a
the
fact.
Aspersion.
No.
The aspersion is that.
Excuse me, senators, could you two of you should not be on the floor. Now, one of you, are you, okay.
President, the statement read by the member is designed to create the false impression that the Prime Minister went to Europe to deal with this issue of blacklisting and failed. That is incorrect. The Prime Minister went to deal with the issue of another threatened the reality is, and members opposite well know it, that there are any number of threats of adverse listings, blacklistings, you name it, that presently confront the Bahamas. They are being dealt with one after the other as and when they arise. The Prime Minister went to deal with a particular matter and achieved a singular success. Don't get his name mixed up in a lot of other things going on. Be precise in what you say. You have created an aspersion to suggest that the Prime Minister tried to prevent a blacklisting and failed. I'll ask for the record. I'll ask for the words to be struck from the record. I would ask, Madam President, for those words to be struck, those words he read, to be struck because they are untrue as an aspersion on the Prime Minister. They are untrue.
Can you take your seat?
Ma'am.
Thank you. Senator, would you please give some consideration to what you are implying, and please reword what you are saying?
Okay. I don't know. But he traveled in January and March. We were blacklisted in February.
What you traveling for?
On a different matter. But we
Okay, so senators, you are finished with that, right? Let's move on. I think. Listen to me.
My point I'm just trying to make, right, is that it's continuous meetings, after which we are continually getting blacklisted. Let me finish my thing.
Yes,
speech.
you are on the floor. Finish what you're saying, Senator.
So on my next point, before the minister got up, I said that every time we pass legislation to conform, the bar is raised and the cycle starts once again.
You have a problem with that.
Yeah, but you wouldn't let me finish.
No, but Senator, please. Senator.
Yes, ma'am.
Please continue your presentation.
Anyhow, Thank you for protecting me, Madam President. In December, when we debated the compendium of bills affecting the financial services sector, I stated then that the community of the EU will recommend blacklisting or not meets this month, and I wonder if we will be back here again soon, repeating the cycle. Well, here we are. But since that time, the USA and its territories and the Saudis rejected the list, which brings into question the EU's blacklist validity. One aspect of the financial services sector is expanding securities market. And the Securities Commission of the Bahamas has done a great job in regards to expanding financial services. Many Bahamians are able to purchase shares and invest because of it. The securities sector is a dynamic and should be a growing part of the financial services industry. The Securities Commission of the Bahamas is an independent body charged with the responsibility for providing regulatory oversight for developing capital markets, including investment funds. To date, the Commission has played an important role in the administration of the Investment Fund Act 2003 and now will do with this bill. Madam President, the main query within this bill is, are external administrators necessary? And in my opinion, they are. Unfortunately, while it's also important, we must also include Bahamians as administrators as well, which is included in the bill as well. The majority institutional fund administrators will not set up in the Bahamas, though, because they are in New York, Connecticut, and London. The bill speaks at length to the regulations put in place to properly manage this part of the industry in hopes that growth of this sector would be in the near future. According to stakeholders involved, to attract institutional investment, we need to lift this restriction and work hand in hand with members of the financial services industry to find ways to enhance the growth of the industry. Wealth management work is a commodity as well. Asset management is nothing like a bag of sugar, a hill of beans, or a truckload of sand. Regardless of how we rely on computers to help us manage portfolios, asset management is ultimately driven by human decisions. The quality of these decisions greatly impacts investor well-being. But with respect to funds, yes, as well as expertise. People are looking for alternative options to the Cayman on institutional funds, and we have to do something more to try and attract different business. The government needs to undertake an aggressive promotional roadshow to market us in the international market and to try to catch up to the Cayman Islands. The government should earmark specific dollars to do this under this administration and promote the Bahamas as a financial service friendly to try and garner the business that we have lost. We must find ways for financial services industry to tie itself to the domestic economy as well and provide real, tangible benefits to the Bahamian people. Since an expanded corporate presence would speak greater commercial activity and job creation. The financial services industry is evolving, and my view is that I don't think that we can deny the high volume business is gone, maybe a thing of the past. So we might have to attract high value business instead. I have a few friends in the financial services industry, and they continuously express to me the frustration of the industry and how the government must find ways to be supportive and transform it. The Bahamas traditionally had secrecy and tax minimization, but that model is long obsolete. And now has to restructure and reposition the financial services industry and by extension the wider economy for continued growth by developing new competitive advantages in a world that is agitated by tax transparency. The global economy is integrated and ever-changing. We must be innovative in our services and product offering while also putting in the framework for policy and innovation that will foster flexibility for the creation of new products and services as well as investment in new areas of financial services. The Cayman Islands is recognized as a great premier global financial hub. It efficiently connects law-abiding users and providers of investment capital and financing from around the world, benefiting developed and developing countries. Madam President, the government must get to work to help save the financial services industry and this bill is one in the right direction. The people are just tired of lip service. And Madam President, I have said it before, and I will say it again. We must bring common sense legislation to this place that meaningfully benefits the Bahamian people. I will support it if it positively impacts Bahamians. We, the PLP, will support it. Thank you, and God bless you, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I support the bill.
As many, Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jenny Isaacs Dotson. Hey, what's the pin you have? What is the pin you have on?
Still morning. Afternoon now. Good afternoon, Madam President and fellow senators.
Gentlemen,
talking.
Proceed, please, Senator.
You know, I'm a teacher, so I don't particularly like my students talking while I'm speaking.
It's a good thing you're not in school.
I just make you do hands up and stretch, Senator Mitchell.
It's a good thing you're not in school. Proceed, Senator. Proceed, Senator.
Good afternoon, Madam President and fellow senators. I stand here today to thank the Almighty God for allowing me to open my eyes and to see the sunrise today, and to be in the month of April 2019. I would like to express my sincere condolences to the entire Roll family on the loss of their son, Perry Roll Jr. This entire incident is very unfortunate, but reminds us all that we must do a better job as a country in ensuring that our young children are being taught from very young to become productive citizens of the Bahamas. In particular, Madam President, parents must take greater responsibility by truly parenting their children and ensuring that their well-being, safety, security, access to education, religion, and health is done until they reach the age of majority. This also speaks to the number of children that are being abducted, and again speaks to the need for greater parenting, because obviously we're having too many children left unsupervised, particularly when they come out of school in the afternoons. So parents have to take, and we need to make them more responsible for their children who are under the age of majority. I would also like to extend condolences to my family from Black Point, Exuma, on the passing of my uncle Van Ferguson, affectionately known as Smashy. The island of Exuma has lost a gem, a sailing champion, a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, boat builder, churchman, musician. Really, he was a man for all seasons who has left his footprints in the sands of the Bahamas. I would also like to extend a happy birthday wishes to my sister, Nurse Alma Tinker, who is celebrating her birthday today. I too would like to extend congratulations to REACH as they celebrate Autism Month, and that we in the Bahamas will have a greater awareness and appreciation for the disabled community amongst us, and to treat them better in our country. I would also like to congratulate the Special Olympics team that attended the 2019 Special Olympics World Summer Games held in Abu Dhabi, and they got 14 medals, which included 6 golds, 3 silver, and 5 bronze. Madam President, I again thank the Honorable Prime Minister for giving me this opportunity to serve as a senator. With the Almighty God by my side, I stand here today to speak to this very significant legislation which will have a profound effect on investment funds in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. This bill is meant to update the law relating to the regulation of the investment funds business and to bring the law into harmony with international standards and best practices. Madam President, the investment funds form a critical component of the Bahamas Financial Services Toolkit. As of December 31st, 2018, there were 749 licensed investment funds and 62 licensed investment fund administrators in our jurisdiction. The investment funds industry has been exemplary in demonstrating Bahamian innovation in the financial services sector. We see the leading specific mandate alternative regulatory test fund product which was developed in the 2003 legislation, known by the industry as the Smart Fund, and more lately the investment condominium, which was a groundbreaking legal structure for Bahamian investment funds. This advanced piece of legislation, Madam President, will update the existing legislation, the Investment Fund Bill 2003, and bring it in line with international standards established by the European Union under the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive, AIFMD, as already explained by the Attorney General. The need for this reform came about, according to the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honorable K. Peter Turnquest, when he said the 2003 Act governing misses the mark on key regulatory provisions required to oversee the industry at current internationally acceptable levels. This was clearly seen when the Bahamas was subject to a peer review under the International Monetary Fund's Financial Sector Assessment Program in 2012. And the country's investment fund legislation failed 4 out of the 5 principles required. Some of the shortcomings in the 2003 bill were connected to the fact, 1, that only the investment fund administrator and not the fund operator, manager, or custodian was the focus of a full assessment of its governance, organization, and operational conduct. 2, the exact requirements regarding the operational conduct of custodians and the separation of client assets were not in the Investment Funds Act 2003. 3, there was inadequate requirements concerning conduct in the valuation, pricing, and redemption of underlying securities. And 4, that managers/advisors of hedge funds were not the focus or had appropriate oversight. Madam President, based on these deficiencies in the Investment Funds Bill 2003, this showed that the Bahamas, that this bill was inappropriate for us, particularly as we call ourselves leaders in the region in wealth management. Madam President, the bill before you now is the culmination of those years of development, and the Securities Commission was responsible for the development of the legislation. To accomplish the task, the Securities Commission relied on its own regulatory experience and its understanding of the local and international regulatory expectations, augmented, of course, with their expertise and drafting consultants. The requirements of the draft bill were the standards of legislation from other jurisdictions, including the UK, the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore, and Jersey, were reviewed. So they were used, those countries' legislation was used to help us in developing the current legislation. Madam President, the Securities Commission also formed an Investment Funds Act technical team comprised of industry professionals from the industry to ensure, of course, that the voice of the industry was represented. And I thought that this was indeed something good because, particularly as I'm in the union and believe in social dialogue and consulting with stakeholders, this was important for me that the industry professionals were consulted in the drafting of this bill. On the 27th of November 2017, the Securities Commission submitted a draft bill for public consultation which concluded on the 28th of April 2018. Although there was a deadline, other comments were received, and as a result, they were considered and will be reflected or be seen in the bill where appropriate. Madam President, the key parts of this new bill comprise the following: an introduction of requirements for fund managers and regulatory oversight for custodians, the introduction of triggers for the licensing of investment funds, the definitions of Bahamas-based and non-Bahamas-based funds, which will guarantee compliance with the EU's substance requirements, the introduction of provisions to allow international administrators to do what without requiring them to hold a license in the Bahamas, and the creation of a regulatory regime compliant with the EU under the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive. Madam President, this investment funds bill brings in a new chapter for financial services in the Bahamas. This bill, 2019, will make the Bahamas a much more attractive country to establish investment funds. Additionally, it was included in this bill and rewritten as to what an investment fund is as it relates to licensing and regulation, and what it means to carry on an investment fund business in or from the Bahamas. The conditions that would be required or to trigger a fund, or the different operators, managers, related parties, and others have been changed in this bill. The definition of an investment fund in this new bill is also different, where there is no need for connection to the Bahamas being included. This new bill will give investment funds the opportunity for entities that fit the definition of an investment fund to be able to do business in or from the Bahamas. This has been more clearly defined in this bill, Madam President, and those investment funds must be incorporated in the Bahamas or available for sale to non-accredited investors who are individual investors, not banks or insurance companies, for example. These triggers now required by this new bill, Madam President, provides protection for the ordinary man who may have invested and there has been some misconduct or infractions of securities law. Other new definitions include wealth management and non-Bahamas-based investment fund, to make these very clear and succinct. The bill moves away from the investment fund administrator, and that a fund based in the Bahamas does not have to appoint an investment fund administrator in the Bahamas. The bill will also allow international business companies, or what we know as IBCs, to be licensed as investment fund administrators, who will have to appoint a compliance officer and must have 2 senior officers living in the Bahamas. Madam President, this new amended bill will also appoint a custodian and operators. Finally, this new bill will ensure that there is compliance with the European Union's Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive, and has been reviewed by a United Kingdom law firm to ensure that this happens. Graham Thompson partner Ryan Pinder said that the updated legislation should make it more attractive to set up institutional funds in the Bahamas. And he went on to say that the prospect of future growth in our fund space is very exciting. Mr. Pinder said in a recently released report by the Global Fund Media and the Bahamas Financial Services Board that major international and fund administrators are not in the business of taking on fiduciary risk in the context of fund administration. He said that, "I think the segregation of duties and the new licensing of fund managers is going to go a long way to demonstrating that we have the commitment to develop and institutionalize fund market." One of the most exciting components of the new Investment Funds Act, he went on to say, will be the ability to properly allocate the fiduciary obligations in the right places. That is, back to the fund manager and not left solely to the fund administrator. This should make it more attractive to setting up institutional funds in the Bahamas. Madam President, the new requirements contained within this bill will preserve our position as an important global financial services center and to enhance our value as a leading jurisdiction of choice for the way we do business in compliance with international regulatory standards. Madam President, the government of the Bahamas has published a bill for an act to update the law, of course, as I said, to regulate the investment funds business, to bring it into harmony with international standards and best practices. In addition, the bill also expands the scope of the powers of the Security Commission of the Bahamas in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds to protect investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas. Madam President, the Bahamas is a sovereign nation capable of making its own laws and regulations. Financial services is our second industry, which provides high-level jobs, and this is reflected in the significant 15% contribution to the gross domestic product, or GDP. The Bahamas, as a premier international financial center conducting trade and businesses with EU member states, its citizens, and the other reputable jurisdictions and financial markets. Madam President, when combined, these actions undermine competitiveness and impede trade, investment, growth, development, and causes serious damage to the Bahamas' reputation. We understand what it takes to remain a well-regulated, compliant, and competitive jurisdiction, and the Bahamas has undertaken the requisite steps to maintain its posture and position as a premier international financial center, and one that will continue to prosper, Madam President. I wish to extend to the entire Bahamas a blessed and happy Easter holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Asmani. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Dr. Michael Darville.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Madam President, I also would like to join with fellow senators in wishing the REACH organization all the success, and to say that their campaign to sensitize the Bahamian public about autism is not only a good thing, but would prove to be beneficial to our country and to the many individuals who suffer from autism. Madam President, people usually say that the Lord gives special children to special people. And having a child with autism, I'm quite familiar with what this disease is all about and what we need to do as a country to ensure that our children with special needs meet all of the equivalent requirements as compared with counterparts in developed countries. I know when we were in office, the Minister of Education, under the direction of our Prime Minister, the Honorable Perry Christie, made attempts in our public schools to create avenues for children with autism to have some of the best quality care possible, and came under great criticism because it appears as if a lot of money was being spent for a small group of individuals. But I beg to disagree with that fact, because the reality is that anyone who have a family member with an autistic child or have an autistic child themselves realize that it takes a tremendous amount of resources in order to give that child the needs that is required. And for some of us who happen to be in a better financial position than many of our brothers and sisters in the community, whose children suffer from autism, they need the financial support of the government, the Department of Social Services, as well as organizations like REACH to ensure that they get access to the quality of care so that the child can become what he or she is destined to be. Madam President, this morning I rise to make my brief contribution to the Investment Fund Bill 2019 because the bill, when it's passed, would certainly help the financial services sector, but more particularly those who manage investment funds. I would also like to thank the AG because the bill is a very technical, complicated piece of legislation for dissecting the bill, but putting specific emphasis on the issue of exemption, which is a very contentious issue. And I think he clarified the government position as it relates to it, but this business of exemption was something that was resonating in the community as well. Madam President, we on this side, as with my colleagues, support the bill, and once passed, the bill will update the laws as it relates to investment funds and expand the powers of the Security Commission to regulate. That is important because the bill itself is one thing, but the Securities Commission, with a complex bill like this, we need a watchdog to be watching this very closely to ensure that the regulatory regime put forth meets the necessary requirement that will comply with international standards. This is good news for the industry and hopefully, with proper marketing, attract new business to our jurisdiction. Madam President, this bill will essentially repeal and replace the 2003 Investment Funds Act that is currently in place, and much of the suggested changes in the existing act were driven by private sector, not government. You see, sometimes government need to step aside and let those individuals who know how to generate capital come to the forefront. And so this is a typical example of what is required for us who in governance to allow those institutions or those businesses who understand the industry to bring forward the necessary recommendation so that they can be incorporated in law. And the Securities Commission, who is responsible for watching and to ensuring that these laws are put into practice. We on this side understand the importance of this bill, and once again we are calling on the government to put some funds aside in the upcoming budget cycle to ensure that the proposed legislative changes and the new regulatory framework can ultimately attract new businesses to the financial services sector. One of the things what we find with a lot of these complicated bills, that we put some good things on paper, but we don't have the necessary resources to let the world know what we got and what we're trying to do. So a good digital platform on one of our portals at the Ministry of Financial Services sector will definitely guide us and allow the Securities Commission as well as the private sector to benefit from some of these new innovative laws. Madam President, there's a saying that money makes the world go round. And we believe the access to funds will help the industry to capitalize on these innovative changes in this new bill that is currently resonating very well in the industry. Madam President, I listened to some of the comments made by a few members on the side opposite in the other place concerning the bill, who tried to paint a picture suggesting that this new bill was driven by the current F&M administration. The truth of the matter is that most of the suggested changes in the 2003 Investment Fund Act were driven by private sector, and both governments, PLP and F&M, played significant role in facilitating the private sector and the technical teams at the AG office, the financial services sector, and the Securities Commission that brought us to where we are today. Former Minister Hope Strachan and the current minister, the Honorable Brent Simonet, both played supportive roles in with the private sector, and this bill is a good example of what continuous governance is all about. Putting our political differences aside in the best interest of industry and working together to make sure that we get the best package so that we can generate new jobs and create sustainable jobs in the financial services sector. Madam President? Hey, it is true. It is true. The suggested changes outlined in this piece of legislation clearly demonstrate that the rules governing the financial services sector are constantly changing, and the laws that were considered to be state-of-the-art in 2003 are no longer meet international standards. Like this bill, many other laws governing the industry needs major overhauling to ensure that our jurisdiction meet international standards, remain competitive so that we can become more attractive as a jurisdiction and rebuild our financial services sector. Like other bills brought before us, I am of the view that this innovative piece of legislation in years to come will find its way back to these honorable chambers for further amendments because the goalpost is changing daily. Madam President, 16 years ago, when the 2003 Investment Fund Bill was enacted and the regulatory framework put in place for establishing, administrating, and managing investment funds in the Bahamas, they were considered state-of-the-art then, and they met the international standards, which no longer is the case. Madam President, unit trusts, companies, partnerships, investment condominiums, and others which fall under the current Investment Fund Act are governed by the laws of the Bahamas, have a trustee or investment fund administrator who must have a place in the Bahamas to do business or is incorporated and registered in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And yes, under the current laws, all investment funds must disclose, issue an offering memorandum, and conduct an annual audit. The proposed changes to the current act would modernize the sector and positively impact the development of industry by removing a lot of the red tape that hinder the ease of doing business in our country. One of the biggest changes in the current law is that it would be no longer necessary for the administrator to be Bahamian. With the passing of this bill, if an investor wants to have a fund domiciled in the Bahamas, one can appoint an administrator of their choice. This creates flexibility, and this causes other investment funds around the world to look at our jurisdiction for coming to put their money to. The new clause is apparently a winner for the industry and also has the potential to attract new business to our jurisdiction and liberalize the investment fund sector. Madam President, there are other key amendments that would certainly modernize the sector, protect investors, the general public, and the reputation of our country. There's a saying, what you give to the world, you cannot take back. Reputation is everything, and once it's lost, it's difficult to gain it back. We support our industry partners and all the changes to the current laws that would allow them to qualify for alternative investment fund management directive and ultimately qualify industry players to do business with international partners and European entities. This is not only a plus for the industry, but would help to create much needed sustainable jobs in the financial services sector. Madam President, the bill, like I said before, is a very complicated piece of legislation. The Attorney General dissected the bill for us, and in doing so, we now have a better understanding of exactly what the Securities Commission is trying to do and will accomplish with the support of the private sector. We support the bill, and we look forward to working closely with our industry partners in the future to ensure that the financial services sector is able to grow, to become healthy, and prosper. Thank you.
So we're going to meet the week of June 10th. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Kwesi Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, it is an honor and a privilege to stand and to be able to speak in this place. And like many other senators, I give God thanks for Hope that's better. Madam President, as I indicated, I want to give God thanks for being here this morning. It is a privilege to be able to stand and to speak or this afternoon. It is a privilege to be here to stand and to speak very, very briefly on what is obviously a agreed upon bill. And I want to say also, just before I get into the presentation, I think this week, on Monday, I want to congratulate all of the participants of the National High School Basketball Tournament that took place in Grand Bahama over the weekend. I want to give a special congratulations to those two teams, and those two teams just happen to be from Grand Bahama. But those two teams, two male teams, I want to also congratulate the female players as well. But the two male teams who happen to be in the finals, the Tabernacle Falcons and the St. George's Jaguars. And the St. George's Jaguars were the ones that came out victorious. And so we want to congratulate the St. George's Jaguars for being the best basketball team in the country, best high school basketball team in the country at the moment. Well, they were the best basketball team at the moment in the country. And so we commend the coaches, we commend all the players, we commend all of the participants in the entire tournament. And so we are very pleased that they are continuing this tradition of stellar, top-class high school basketball teams that come out of Grand Bahama. It just seems as though Grand Bahama breeds good high school basketball players and high school basketball teams, and so we want to congratulate them. And obviously, looking at my height, I could only dream of accomplishing what they are able to accomplish. But I congratulate to them. Madam President, a lot has been said about this bill, and so I really need not go into any detail with respect to the different parts of this bill. I believe all of the senators who spoke in their own way gave some very, very good particular points about the bill. The opposition, and I completely agree with the comments that were made by the opposition members, by Senator Darville. In fact, my second note that I have here is the bill was widely consulted with the industry, but it was also industry driven. And that's a point I think Senator Darville made and that I agree with him on. And I believe that's why you have such wide bipartisan support, is because it was industry driven. And I think what we need to do is to use this as an example to continue to encourage our stakeholders, continue to encourage the private sector, continue to encourage those industry leaders to come together and focus on advancing their industries in partnership, obviously, with the government, but in putting together and taking the initiative in putting together pieces of legislation that will advance their industry. And I believe that if it is truly industry driven, then no political party, no government, no opposition is really going to stand in their way when we see that the industry needs it, it is going to benefit the industry, and if it does benefit the industry, it will benefit the country as a whole. And so we want to encourage that.
We also, Madam President, I want to just say very briefly some things that were said about this bill and to agree with them, where it says that it announces to the world, announces to the country, but announces to the industry and to the world that Bahamian investment fund professionals and the industry are ready to compete internationally. And so it is not just a piece of legislation, but it is a statement that we are here, we want to be significant players, we want to be significant contributors to this industry, but it also speaks to an international call that says we are ready to do business in this industry. And so we want to congratulate the Securities Commission and all of those industry partners who are putting this call out to the public and putting this call out. It is also said, Madam President, that this strengthens the financial services industry by specifically outlining avenues to incorporate, register, and establish funds in the Bahamas, thereby establishing a unit of trust that is governed by laws of the Bahamas. So it is, in essence, saying that this piece of legislation is to a high standard, a high international standard. And that if you want to do business in the Bahamas, then you are going to do it at a high international standard. And that's, again, one very, very important thing. Because many things are being said about the financial services industry. Many things are being said by the EU. Many things are being said by other international regulators about the Bahamas. That is, and a lot of it is untrue. But it is important for us that if we are going to be a player in the financial services sector, that we are able to set a gold standard and say to the world that if you want to do business in the Bahamas, then you must do it at a high level and a high standard. Madam President, as I take my seat, as I said, I want to be very, very brief with respect to this. We must continue to find ways to modernize the way that we do business. We must continue to, and this is just one example of that, that if we saw that in 2003, the way the securities industry or the way that the investment funds was outdated, then they were courageous enough to stand up and say, this is what we need to do to change it, and this is how we fix it. And so we need to be able to do this in other industries. We need to be able to look at specific industries where we are lagging behind and have an industry-driven movement for us to be motivated to move these things forward. Things like, Madam President, the central bank that has recently announced that they're going to have a new electronic token, which is going to move us towards the cashless system. You know, these are the kind of advances that we need to continue to be motivated to do and push the industry, push the banking industry to be able to move forward with things like this. The modernization and digitization unit in the Office of the Prime Minister in advancing their e-government transformation. You know, one of the things that we are severely challenged with in the government system is doing things the same way and doing things in a inefficient way. And what that causes is it causes more cost and time and stress on the citizen. And I find that a lot of the processes that we are doing in the government, it's not the government working for the people, but it's almost like the people working for the government. And so with the e-government initiative that is going to be continued out of the Office of the Prime Minister, we want to do away really with this whole aspect of having to continue to provide the government with the same information over and over again and be able to have the specific industry ministries and departments to digitally be able to talk to each other to make services and make applications that citizens have to do simpler. A very simple example in terms of an advancement that we believe we are heading towards is if you go to the passport office and you apply for a passport.
Minister, may I just move the
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Madam President, we are fast approaching the hour, so I would beg leave to move the motion that the business of the Senate do continue beyond 1 p.m.
Thank you.
If I may attend a second.
I'd rise to second, Madam President.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate move beyond 1 p.m. today. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the Senate will continue beyond 1 p.m.
Thank you very much, Madam President. No, thank you. Madam President, as I was indicating, where I believe we are moving towards with respect to this digitization is, and one example that I was given was the passport office, where in order to renew your passport, the government requires you to produce a birth certificate or a marriage certificate or an affidavit. And in most of these cases, most if not all of these cases, the same information that they are asking the citizen to provide is already in the possession of the government. So they cause you to go from one government office to another government office and provide the government office with the government information. So one effective way of dealing with this is for ministries to digitally talk to each other so that the information that is in the Registrar General's office will be able to digitally pass to the passport office, and the same thing with respect to the national insurance, the same thing with respect to driver's license, which will make it far more convenient for the citizen. But these are the kind of advances that we must continue to do, and it has to be intentionally done. But it is one advancement, again, one example, like the piece of legislation that is before us, one example of where we need to go in terms of innovative thinking that we must continue to push the envelope. Things like the cryptocurrency draft legislation that's out there. It's, again, pushing into an industry that is new, innovative, it is fast-moving, but the Bahamas has to, if we want to be a part of the financial services industry, again, we must move towards doing that. So we have it out for consultation. We are inviting industry partners to be able to speak to it, give their input, say where it's good, say where it's bad, to be able to give their input on what is going to be a very important industry. Madam President, with those few words, I do support this investment bill. It is a very, very important piece of legislation, very important for the industry. Again, it has wide bipartisan support, and I, for one, support it. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam President. The only point I wish to raise is this. We have done so many of these bills, supposedly to help the financial services sector. I wonder if at some point the government would provide for us what does this sector actually contribute to the Bahamas. I hear all the figures about GDP and the contribution in terms of its percentages, and the reason I raise this is because just recently I read where Switzerland, as a part of it's shrinking as a part of, as a percentage of its GDP, so it's on the decline. And the question I keep asking myself is, we're doing the limbo every month now for these Europeans in order to supposedly save this sector. So, number one, what is the percentage of the GDP that it actually contributes? What is the actual volume of money? How many millions does it contribute? But lastly, how many people does this actually hire in this country? And I want to focus in particular on relationship managers, because that's one of the areas where this is the person who goes out, I believe, and markets the product, deals with the client, tries and keeps the business, maintains the portfolio. And the question is, in my mind, how many Bahamians actually work as relationship managers in these banks, and how many actually get the opportunity to be relationship managers at a senior level? Because some of the complaints coming from our youngsters is that they don't actually get the opportunity. And what disturbs me also is that you hear these reports of these people who come in, work for these private banks from outside the country. They live a very good life in this country at a very high salary. Their children's education subsidized. They live in good housing. And yet they seem to have a dislike for the people of the country and the country itself. They complain about everything about the Bahamas. It's this, it's that, the people are too slow, they're not fast enough, so on and so forth. It also reminds me of my experience going through our airports sometime through the U.S. pre-clearance. And it confounds me that these people who work here and live here seem to know nothing about the place in which they live. It's as if they are in some enclave. The people here have no relevance to them whatsoever. So that's the reason I raised this point. And perhaps it's a small point. And the point is, we're doing all these things. We're saying that this sector is creating these jobs. But how many jobs are being created? What are the opportunities for our young people to actually get the high-paying jobs, where their children's education will be subsidized, where they will get good salaries, where they will get good housing, and where they will get the respect not only from the people who manage the banks, but also the people who are the clients. You know, the expression, when you see the expression on some people until they walk into a bank and they look, and because the fella doesn't look like him, they say, I don't want that person dealing with my business. And I've heard this happening in this sector, and that some of the banks, the management of the banks, do not back up the employees. That what counts is whether the fella has the skill, or the woman has the skill, not how that person looks phenotypically or otherwise. And so I want to root out all of this stuff. The previous administrations, or let's go back to the Pindling administration in its first incarnation, had a mechanism for dealing with this by imposing quotas and saying, you have to give me a plan to Bahamianize the sector. And it has to be done next year. It's got to be 10. Next year after that, it's got to be 20 until the management is Bahamian. I don't know that we're in that era anymore. But certainly our kids expect that if we're doing all of this stuff to have this sector in the Bahamas, that they ought to have the opportunities to move up in the system, and they ought to be treated with respect and have equal opportunity in this sector and not be looked at askance. So I just want to speak up for them as we do this for these folk and protecting the sector. Speak up for the Bahamians who want to work in the sector so that they can have equal opportunity. Thank you.
As many.
Thank you, Madam President. Very briefly, in wrapping up, let me commend all senators on the quality and scholarship in most cases with which of their presentations. I think that obviously a lot of thought went into every presentation that we've had today. Let me just say to the leader opposite, I share his concerns. I share the concerns expressed in terms of job numbers, although I think the central bank does maintain and closely track employment in the sector. And I would say that historically, the sector has been extremely beneficial to the Bahamas, the financial sector, and that historically, many Bahamians were able to, access the same benefits that are pointed to. Usually, they get them when they travel outside of their home jurisdiction. And so you have some former central bankers who, in the heyday of the financial services sector and banking, offshore banking, particularly private banking, were in fact placed in senior managerial positions offshore on mainland European countries, Switzerland, etc. Some learned, like Julian Francis, to speak French, I think Spanish and whatever. So there have been tremendous opportunities in the past, historically, that have been offered to Bahamians by this sector, notwithstanding the concern we all feel about the issue of ensuring not only that the sector is present in the Bahamas, but that it is relevant to the aspirations, dreams, and yes, attainments of young Bahamians who would look to the sector for not only employment, but gainful employment, not only gainful employment, but meaningful employment, not only meaningful employment, but advancement to the higher levels in the sector. It was with this view in mind, certainly, that when we crafted the Commercial Enterprises Bill, we placed in that bill a requirement for, and this bill is aimed at attracting the new mobile technologies of now, but certainly the immediate future, where, you know, everything is digital, everything is tech, and this is opening whole new panoramas of investment potential, not only for foreign investment inward to the Bahamas, but also for Bahamians to take a chance, get in that field. It's wide open. And in the Commercial Enterprises Bill, really to give a jump start, not only to the tech industry generally, but certainly to the tech hub dream or vision, if you will, for Freeport, Grand Bahama, and also for thousands upon thousands of tech-savvy young Bahamians. Because I say my children know more about how to work and operate these devices than I'll ever know. Okay, our computers, you name it, laptops, anything digital, that they've grown up in that world. They've grown up in digital world. We grew up analog. And but in the Commercial Enterprises Bill, we embedded in that a reporting requirement that before a license could be issued under the Commercial Enterprises Bill, the proposed inward investor had to have a job plan, a business plan. It has to be approved. How many Bahamians are going to be employed, etc. What positions, what jobs they're going to do. What is your training schedule to empower and train Bahamians who are brought in? So the concept behind that is certainly that we would, in terms of the new technologies that we hope to attract with the Commercial Enterprises Bill, go back to the old system, if you will, of monitoring productive sectors and ensuring that there is a level not only of Bahamian employment, but training and empowerment throughout everyone offered the opportunity to invest and be here in the Bahamas. Let me say that just in finality on this issue, the sector has, since 2000, financial sector has been under tremendous pressures. It is obvious that the global community, the G40, G60, you name it, have determined, on a course of action. It is for us to be able to anticipate, for us to be able to adapt. The sector has transformed from being predominantly private banking now to other forms of investment-related banking, and we see investment funds, etc., taking a larger role or piece of the pie. However the sector develops, and it will continue to develop as long as it is able to exist, it will be our job, once we reach positions of stabilization, stability, and growth in the sector, to once again continue the principles of moral suasion, the principles of dialogue that is intended to foster Bahamian growth and development at every level, including the highest levels. Thankfully, the kind of gut-wrenching prejudice of someone walking in a bank and seeing a darker-hued black man, I don't want to deal with him. Those days, I think, are very much in the past. I think that the bedrock of gut racism in this country, in this hemisphere, we know where that came from. We know the Jim Crow mentality. That is very much a thing of the past, and as we go forward, I think the internal dynamics that even over in that country are such that such ridiculous attitudes are being frowned upon more and more and more. So the outlook for me is positive. I guess like Moody's, we'd have to say tentative but with a positive outturn. We are in a period of trial. We will prevail, we will succeed, and we will continue to grow. And so on that note, Madam President, I now beg to move that the question now be put.
Thank you, Senator. The question is that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to update the law relating to the regulation of investment funds business, to bring the law into harmony with international standards and best practices, to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds, to protect investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas, to repeal and replace the Investment Funds Act, Chapter 369A, and for connected matters. As many as are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed.
Bring the law to harmony with international standards and best practices, to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds, to protect investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas, to repeal and replace the Investment Funds Act, Chapter 369A, and for the
Further second readings?
Thank you, Madam President. I beg leave now to move for the second reading and committal of a bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act. Madam President, just briefly, this changes the period in respect of which financial institutions must hold tax information from 5 years to 6 years, which accords with the requirements of the OECD. Let me say that the standard period required for money laundering matters is to hold beneficial ownership information and any financial information necessary as part of a money laundering or terrorist financing investigation for 5 years. But for tax purposes, they want it held for 6. At some point, we may come back and just pass a law, say any need for any institution to hold financial or client information should be whatever the latest period is. But right now, we're just doing it one step at a time. If I may attain a second, I'd appreciate it.
I'd rise a second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act. As many as are in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act.
Further second readings.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading committal of a bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Bill 2019, Act 2019. Madam President, just very quickly, this is a very technical amendment to require that any country-by-country report required to be filed with respect to the fiscal year that begun on or before the 31st of May of 2018 shall be filed no later than the 31st of March 2019. It's a technical issue, but one that is important in the heads of our interlocutors abroad that we have this provision in the law. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019. As many as are in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed.
Bill for an act to amend the multinational entities financial reporting amendment.
Further second readings?
No further second readings, Madam President.
You want to move?
Madam President, I now beg leave to move that the Senate do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole with Madam Vice President in the chair.
Is there
If I may obtain a seconder.
It has been moved and seconded that the Senate resolve itself into the committee of the whole with the Vice President in the chair. As many as are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Senate will now resolve itself into the committee of the whole with the Vice President in the chair.
Just move the whole bill without objection. I think we have to go through the process.
Committee of the Whole.
Madam Chairman, I beg leave to move that the long title of the bill be accepted. Investment Funds Bill.
Is there a
The
second?
Investment Funds Bill, yes. That the long title of the Investment Funds Bill 2019 be accepted.
It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the Investment Funds Bill be agreed. As many as are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The long title of the bill is agreed.
Madam President, I beg leave to move that the short title be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the Investment Fund Bill be agreed. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The short title is agreed.
Madam President, I beg leave to move that sections 2 through 167
wonderful.
be agreed.
Seconder, please. It has been moved and seconded that sections 2 through 169, 67 of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Sections 2 through 167 of the bill is agreed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I beg leave to move that the schedule to the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the schedule to the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The schedule to the bill is agreed.
Madam Chairman, I beg leave to move that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
Second, please. It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill in its entirety is agreed.
Madam Chairman, moving on now to the automatic exchange of financial account information bill. I beg leave to move for that the long title of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the exchange, automatic exchange of financial account information bill be agreed. Amended.
Be agreed. No. Be agreed.
Agreed? Be agreed. As many as are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The bill, the ayes have it. The bill in the long title is agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that Section 2 of the bill be agreed.
You're not going to do the short title?
Oh, sorry. Pardon me. My mistake. Thank you. I beg leave to move that the short title to the bill be agreed.
Second, please. It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The short title of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the Section 2 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the Section 2 of the bill is agreed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Section 2 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the bill in its entirety be agreed. If I may obtain a seconder.
It's been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill in its entirety is agreed. Have one more.
Okay. Madam Chair, I beg, moving now to the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill. I beg leave to move that the long title of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Bill Amendment, the long title, long title, be agreed. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Long title.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The long title of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave to move that the short title and commencement of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title and commencement of the bill be agreed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The short title and commencement of the bill is agreed.
Madam President, Madam Chairman, I beg leave to move that Clause 2 of the bill be agreed.
Madam Chair, it has been moved and seconded that Clause 2 of the bill be agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Section.
Clause 2.
Clause 2 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chairman, I beg leave to move that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The bill in its entirety is agreed.
Madam Chair, I beg leave now to move that the Madam President do resume her chair.
Seconded. It has been moved and seconded that the Madam President returns to the chair. As many as are in favor, the aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. It is agreed that the President returns to the chair. Where is she? Madam President, the Committee of the Whole has met. 3 bills that have been discussed today have been agreed in their entirety.
Honorable Senators, the Vice President and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole has reported that the committee has gone through the bills having made no amendments. Third reading and passing.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the third reading and passage of a bill, the short title of which is the Investment Funds Bill 2019.
It has been moved and seconded that the following... Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a second? Yeah, I'm moving quickly here. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. A bill for an act to update the law relating to the regulation of investment funds business, to bring the law into harmony with international standards and best practices, to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds, to protect investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas, to repeal and replace the Investment Funds Act, Chapter 369A, and for connected matters. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Bill for an act to update the law relating to the regulation of investment funds business, to bring the law into harmony with international standards and best practices, to expand the scope of the powers of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas in relation to regulated persons and parties related to investment funds, to protect the investors, the public, and the reputation of the Bahamas, to repeal and replace the Investment Funds Act, Chapter 369A, and for connected
Order that the bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Investment Funds Act 2019. Further third readings?
Thank you, Madam President. I beg leave to move that for the third reading and passage of a bill, the short title of which is the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Act 2019.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. A bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019. As many as are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019.
Order that the bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Act 2019. Further third readings?
Thank you, Madam President. I beg leave now to move for the third reading and passage of a bill, the short title of which is the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Bill 2019.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information Act. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to amend the Automatic Exchange of Financial Account Information.
Order that the bill do now pass and the title thereof Exchange of Financial Account Information Amendment Act 2019. Yeah.
Yes. You wanted it to pass?
Yeah. Further third readings?
No further third readings, Madam President.
Consideration of House amendments, resolutions,
None.
discharge of select committees, notices for future meetings.
Madam President, just by way of information, we intend to adjourn sine die, and I would now take this opportunity to renew all matters on the agenda, which is in the name of the government.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Fred Mitchell.
Sorry, I'd like to renew the notice standing in the name of the opposition.
Thank you, Senator. Orders for the clerk. I do now order the clerk to take the bills passed today to the Speaker and acquaint him that the Senate has consented to the same without amendments. Adjournment.
Madam President, I beg leave now to move that the Senate, on its rising, be adjourned sine die.
It has been moved and seconded that the Senate do now adjourn sine die. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the Senate adjourns sine die.
Madam President, I now beg leave to move that the Senate do now adjourn.
The Senate is adjourned.